Hello there, and welcome to the value of everything. So, this is a rather interesting topic of discussion today. It's regarding humans' evolution and the current state of play, what's happening, and there is a lot of theories flying out there in terms of where we stand. And I would like to throw a few more theories into the mix and see where it lies. I do remember a fairly good movie. I can't even remember. The thing is, I tried to do a Google search and I couldn't really quite find it. But it was a comedy movie. It didn't really sort of blow me away in laughter, but it's called something like Stupidity or something like that. I can't remember. It might come to me later anyway. But there's a good comedy film in terms of that, and it was just a theory of just how humanity may be just getting a little bit dumbed down over time, and really people lose sense of the idea of how to create anything, how to invent anything. But because we have just created such a automated mass marketing world for people, where nobody really knows how to use change a plug socket anymore, and a number of things in terms of how we're less and less of a handyman. But there's all different theories. I would like to just delve straight into the mix of whether there is a certain level of stupidity that is happening. I guess one of the major things, which is a thing about humanity, is that there's a couple of options which happen. There's either the choices that we make ourselves in terms of what kind of mate we choose for ourselves and reproduce. I guess a lot of the decision making does happen in terms of what the female chooses in terms of her realities. So, dependent on how well educated the lady appears to be, there we will have a more intelligent person. It all depends on and how culturally that she is programmed. Will have the certain being that we will have in the future. So that's one of the theories. I guess if a man has a number of assets to him, if he has accumulated certain levels of wealth, if he has been fairly virtuous and he is kind, generous, and he is sociable, there's obviously a lot of positives to a woman to decide on choosing that kind of mate as well. But there is different theories that go sometimes against that a little bit. Sometimes there is one of the podcasts that I made earlier about lookism, which does get applied. So and that is not just purely what women choose as lookism on men, but also vice versa. So there is that certain driver which is kicking in, and that potentially is a little bit more of a cultural phenomenon. I believe, obviously, the next one obviously would be the families or the friends and families, the immediate circles choice of the partner that you choose. So, obviously, in a lot of cultures, especially like India, there is almost to the point of which the parents do choose the partner of the man and woman, and it's in form of an arranged marriage. So they surely do have, in certain ways, it's kind of like if you look at an evolutionary perspective, you could say that the elderly are more wiser than the youthful, but obviously there's negatives and positives against this. I could probably make this a whole podcast in itself. So the wisdom of the old will choose the woman or the man from more of the social higher status, which, okay, status ain't really the the most important thing in the world. But so status, financial ability, the actual, and obviously the status is probably more so a byproduct of wealth and education and ability to do certain jobs to high quality. So the family would select the correct woman for that man and woman, and hopefully dissuade them. And obviously, you do get a lot of these sort of like depictions of I've been put into an arranged marriage of somebody that's dog ugly. I can't stand this woman or this man. I really don't like being with him. But obviously, in terms of being very sensible choices, this choice may be the correct choice to make. Now, obviously, it could be quite a sham if this is just purely based upon status alone, and that man really doesn't have, other than the title of his own family's name, beyond that, really has no incredible virtues or any incredible wealth. That obviously would be a little bit disastrous for a female. But yeah, so that obviously happens in a it's a far more structured level of how a marriage is arranged by the parents, and there is full parents' involvement in that prospect. I guess there must be certain different levels. There must be extreme levels where you have this is the way, or you're not part of the family, and then there's probably a bit more moderate levels of I can give you a few choices and you can try and pick which one you prefer the most. Things like that, I presume, would occur to a certain extent. So, and obviously there is a fairly valid reasoning behind that. When we're young and youthful, we tend to be pursuing things which are part of our biological drivers, which would be a high level of sexualized fidelity in a partner, so heightened masculinity in a male, or heightened femininity in a female, or sexuality in a female. So it would appeal to the fact of somebody who's older, who has less of that sort of overtaking of the impulses. Because obviously they're not involved in that exchange, and also they would have a little bit more of an intelligent sort of, they can use their heads a bit more in terms of choosing this partner, which would be a lot more wiser for the future survival of their genetic code to be passed on through the generations. So in some ways it might seem shocking, but I think obviously it does make a lot of sense. And philosophers are always at it about selecting the right partner, so they're always into eugenics, and so are obviously scientists are into eugenics. So everyone's involved in eugenics in some way, shape, or form, but it's just the degree to which it's occurring. And obviously, as a philosopher, if there's a level of force which is being applied, that's a bit of a no-no. So against somebody's will. So it's going against the golden rule of morality, and do to what you would do to somebody else. So it's not like your children would now decide on what your parents should have as a partner now, and stuff like that. So I guess you could say the argument, oh well, my parents chose for me, so it could be chosen for you, but it's not really necessarily that case inclined. So that's sort of purpose, and it's fairly valid that obviously if we go back to the Western culture, if your parents do say to you in certain ways and shapes and form that they have certain things that they are which is good about them or negative about them, I guess that's certain levels of arguments that could be put forward to you, and you have to decipher whether it's a problem on your parents' part or a problem on your partner's part. So there's all different areas of thinking in those terms. There's your friends as well, which may again still have a little bit of a perspective on how they choose your partner. So firstly, obviously everyone loves the status of having a say, a celebrity partner or something like that, how your friends are rich and famous, everyone would love. Not everybody, but I guess everybody does have a certain warmth and inclination to rich, powerful, and beautiful people. So there is obviously that little bit, and obviously you'd really want to have friends around you who have less about that kind of element and more so about the people and the virtues. But even so, yeah, there are friends and family, and I have plenty of friends before in the past where they've had partners, and we've noticed that there is definitely a lot of issues which have been occurring, and we've been having quiet words, just not really like saying she's horrible to you, get rid of her or something like that, but just to ask him questions. Are you really happy? Like if this is going to be like this way, it might continue and it might get worse as more marriage and kids happen and things like that. It's things to just consider. So there is definite things which are occurring in terms of relationships, and sometimes I think maybe more so in the Western world, there's maybe a little bit more openness between friends, more so than family sometimes. So when it comes to these kind of discussions, especially when it comes to like men on men discussions, this kind of stuff can happen quite a lot. So yeah, there is definitely a guiding hand in how we choose our sexual partners, or our sexual partners for the long term. Now, maybe not short term, but definitely for the long term. Now, when we always have to think as well in terms, so this is always an important part of how we are evolving itself, and obviously these choices are being made, and this is all these conversations and choice points that we're making is all working towards our evolution, maybe in a very slow state point, but it is still working to our evolution. Now, where it comes to a point now where we have to look at the bigger picture now, and obviously we have things like culture and fashion, things like that. So I guess we could say that we have to look at the element of lookism. Maybe there's different types of cultural things which occur in the media, which may be deemed as attractive now, which may have not been attractive in the past. So for example, currently right now, a little bit of a fad is to have women with large buttocks. So maybe the women with thin buttocks maybe are not quite as highly sexually selected as in comparison to the small buttocks. So we may have just a little bit of genetic programming in terms of that. I guess having a more of a muscular buttock does have an idea that they can produce larger muscles, so we may have more muscular children in the future, depending on the sort of like the more alpha selected, so the ones that have more of a higher choice and sexualized nature. There is all of those little elements which are going to go into, like I guess this is more Western society, but these fads do have these little connections. And if you determine things of how we have throwback years from millennium to millennium, from like 30 years ago, there is a definite connection between one point in time to another. So 1950s do seem to have a little connection to the 1980s, and 1980s does seem to have a connection of the turn of the millennium. There's all different little, and obviously this is to do with like the generations, the next generation of those people are born into this world, and they may like the music, and they carry over the music to their children, and they carry over the genetic looks of those people. So all of a sudden we are favouring those kind of that generation a little bit more, and they're depicted on the TV. So there is different little waves of how culturally we are selecting different mates in the time. I guess the most attractive girls now are slightly different to the most attractive girls in the 1920s. So it's awfully interesting how culture can be very selecting on the way that we live our lives and how we evolve. And we have to look at the big boy in the ring, which is how governments and the state, and how obviously they do have a hand in all of these areas which I've spoken about you, about your family, about your friends, about culture, and also they have the ability to have monetary changes into the way that we choose and value things. So obviously, as we are living in a value-based world, the money is the driver to what we try and pick and choose. If we have monetary incentives to do certain things, then that does definitely have a major impact in the way that we are evolving ourselves. So I will give you the probably the easiest one to pick on, which would be the welfare state. So now that there is a welfare state, it hasn't been around since the dawn of time. It's only been around since like the 1950s. Since there's been a welfare state, there has been, I guess there has been certain generations that have certain kids that have been able to get out of the welfare state, but there has been definite connections between being stuck in the rut of living on welfare from one generation to another generation. I believe that there's a lot of that kind of thing that occurs in the UK. Probably happens a little less so in America, but that is an evolutionary cycle now, because we do appear to have that people can evolve and people can be sexually active and still survive, while still not creating major value for anybody, but being very good at applying for benefits. So we potentially have really ruined the way that a person has been able to survive by this incentive measure, or I guess everyone says it's a stability measure, but it does incentivize people not to work. Sometimes it does seem like a very promising prospect, particularly for a woman, just to get herself pregnant. If she's got no real job prospects, get herself pregnant, and for that she'll be awarded with a house. Maybe not the best area in the world, but she'll be awarded with a house. She'll have a kid. She'll have certain means to survive on. She would have the computer. She would have the pad. She would have the internet. So you can have a fairly decent, entertaining time. And whilst you would have a lot of the working class of people working very hard, they wouldn't even be able to afford a house by that stage, but the benefit class would be able to afford that. I guess obviously if you're a single male, maybe you wouldn't have quite so much of an easy time, but you can see that there is definite molds which can occur in terms of how we choose to run our lives. Now, as the government, this one's a little bit more trickier to put your finger on, but as the government is incentivized by a continuously expanding economy, the government will have a couple of options. The reason why they have to have a continuously expanding economy is because they have to make a lot of promises into the future. And all these promises, they have to take out loans to pay for all these promises. So there's a load of junk which is sitting there waiting in the future, which needs to be paid off. And the only way that it's really managed to be paid off with is to just add on a bit more debt, add on and have an expanding economy, and have also a money supply which is increasing, which is reducing the price of that expense in the future. So everything is all upon expansionism and expanding the population and everything else. Now, Western cultures, even though there has been this massive incentive, there's been like rewards for having more children and all the same. The problem being is that when the Western people have been getting to that age, they have been choosing to have less kids. Maybe there's a lot of dynamics and factors which are coming into the account, but it does seem that to have kids and to be earners is a very hard task. Affordability, obviously, of housing is at rock bottom in a lot of Western countries. You're really going to have two partners working hard. You're going to have the children in daycare. You're going to be slaving away to your bank and a mortgage. There's an incredible amount of disincentivization to having kids. I know obviously the government will try and give you a few incentives to tax incentives to have kids, but there's a massive load of disincentivization to have kids just on a pure cultural level. And there are a lot of people who are deciding, okay, well, I can have a fairly decent, happy life just being a singleton. So why put myself through all of that stress? So governments have been at the same time choosing to increase the population, and the way that a lot of the West has been doing is they've been choosing to get a lot of immigration, particularly from third world countries, granting what's the word? It's not salvation; it's something else. Anyway, regardless of that fact, they've been trying to increase their populations by getting people from outside of their country into their country, and obviously that does change the mix and the genetic pool of the nation. I guess it would probably mix the genetic pool more so of the welfare classes, the ones who are not able to attain a certain level of work, and maybe less so of the original people that have been there for a long time and been working hard and stuff like that. But I guess it does. Different genetic mixes would happen. It's kind of interesting how where you have, say, two different places from two parts of the world, if you do genetically mix that DNA and have a child, that actual DNA is usually a little bit stronger because there's less chances of mutations. So in theory, you do have a little bit more of a healthier child. So there is an interesting counterbalance with regards to more so in the welfare classes in the poor in the Western countries, is that you may have a little bit more of a physical genetic strength, which is occurring, and also during where you're choosing things in the welfare class. Because you have less so of a requirement of the man to selecting a man who stays around, because there is the government to provide for benefits and to provide for the child. The choice of sexual partner can be pretty much determined on the sexual nature of that child. So there's potentially a bit more hypersexualization in the welfare classes, more so than the working classes or the middle classes nowadays. So these little things do have major consequences of our population. Now, I guess in terms of where we're heading and things like that, it is fairly interesting because we seem to be getting a little divergence of what is happening to our genetic pool. There are certain things. There's a lot of families which are single parents, and single parent families is a very dangerous thing for kids. You are removing one of the breadwinners, or the major breadwinner potentially, which would be the man, from the family, so you do put the family at a very, very large perilous state of poverty, which does restrict a lot of things, and a certain level of poverty does, if you're not really getting the sustainable food, nutrition, things like that, and there is big worrying stresses based upon the single parent, then obviously the children will be subjected to a number of stressful factors at the same time. So these things which are where people have become a little bit more self-gratifying and choosing these things does have a detrimental effect, and it does have like an exponential effect on the population. So we do have this thing which is being created by governments, which the government can incentivize and decentivize certain things which can affect the way that we work and we live and we strive for. Another example I like to pick upon, because it's a little bit relevant to me, is that we do seem to have a education system which will base its education upon people's ability to memorize and recite certain information, and not their ability to potentially create and have a real wide variety of knowledgeable pointers. Just from my perspective, I was a complete F throughout my education. However, it wouldn't necessarily seem that way, even though I do and stutter a little bit, it doesn't seem like I have less knowledge than the average token person out there, and particularly where I work for fairly reputable places and highly educated people. I don't necessarily feel, or in any way, shape or form, that I am beneath them. So it is an interesting thing how the education system has strived to put people into a model of the most analytical and the most retaining of information, to be at the forefront of education and knowledge, even when really there's more of an inclination where I did have a fairly high IQ, that wasn't really measured upon myself and where my status was, and it could have been classified from a very early age. So it's interesting how our education system has been modelled to create a very analytical, you could say to a certain extent, closed-mind individual rather than a varied-mind philosopher. You do have a certain bit of channeling which is happening in the education system. Then we could dive through a lot of subjects in terms of the government. We seem to let's just go back to people in general. So people are obviously trying to select sexual partners and stuff like that. Let me just give you my broad perspective of how things are going right now. I believe that there is a lot of divergence out there of what is going on in the world. I think people obviously are very confused. People don't really know what to do, and I think obviously hasn't really got quite a good grasp of the old Victorian views of finding and seeking sexual partners based upon long-term prosperity and happiness. So I think we have obviously got a very hypersexualized culture. There is a little bit of an intolerance of like the old traditional girl who chooses not to have sex on the first date and things like that, which is an awful shame. There is I guess that girl is obviously is really competing against a very hypersexualized market out there. So really that good-natured girl who's trying to find a sustainable sexual partner for the future and to stick around so that he doesn't do a runner on her and things like that is really getting incredibly much harder for her in that sense. So it's a very tough situation. Now I think there may be, in terms of how we've mixed things up a little bit, there may be, just as time progresses, if we are in this government culture paradigm for the next 100, 1,000 years, I think there will be a little bit more so of a divergence of different people and perspectives, and I think there's been a little there's obviously been lots of literatural books and philosophers and theories which have been applied over the years about this. So obviously the easy one to sort of point the finger at is potentially the welfare class. So the welfare class really is in a bit of a tricky situation. If they continuously evolve in this point, they're going to find themselves really of no value and no benefit to society. And obviously, if they've been given lots of freebies throughout their time, I don't really understand how that could be sustainable on a level forevermore. I guess the benefits and the welfare is just an incentive, is a measure just for stability for a meantime until that they can return back to work. And I've made points and counterpoints in the past about how companies can provide welfare regardless of just having an agreement to say, okay, I will provide you with food and sustenance and shelter, and in the return I will find you work, and if for a certain contracted period of time, and I will take a segment of that earnings, and if you can agree to that, then I can provide you that service. And obviously you can have lots of competitors doing all of those things, and it's sort of an insurance brokering company. And then for that return to work strategy, then that person is returning to work. But really, you cannot have that person just permanently out of work and living off of the state, because there is no evolutionary purpose to having a pure sort of. I guess obviously there has been leeches off of people. Leeches off of leeches throughout time. It is a biological programming. There are leeches that exist in not in society, but in nature. So it does exist, but really, once there is a certain viewpoint that there is no real point of keeping a leech on my body, then just general choices will be made to say, okay, well, we don't really require this anymore, and then it will be put against them. So obviously, it's a very hard topic to look at the welfare class, and obviously, I would like the welfare class to just be to have a recovery, just to go back to work, to find and seek ways to create value in this world, and a lot of it is due to the distortions which occur in the marketplaces and the welfare benefit systems which blow them out of the market, and the mass immigration which competes against their wages. So there is all those tiny little factors, and the schooling systems which put them out to be a failure from the start, and the way that they were raised by their parents, which probably was a bit more of a struggle than to be raised by hard-working middle-class families. So it's I would like a recovery story. It's definitely possible, definitely attainable, but in the terms of how the government is trying to manage this system, it's really the welfare class is a failure, and it's unsustainable. Next up would be obviously just your middle class, the working class, the guys that and the girls that will feel a bit ill, feel a bit tired, have a rough time, but they will still jump in the shower, get themselves washed off, and drive or get the train to work. These are the survivors. These are probably the adapters. They probably were working in the farms historically throughout times, and they've gradually migrated into the cities. They do have a little bit of sense amongst themselves. And obviously they have applicable skills. Now, obviously they've got they've had certain advantages. Maybe they've had correct parents who have ushered them and guided them in certain ways. They've had potentially a certain level of intelligence, which has made them to succeed in any sphere that they've been put into. I guess there has been a little bit more in terms of a risk-taking element for them, in terms of they take a risk of going to take an interview, even though it can be a bit stressful and nerve-wracking. They take themselves to interviews and really just do things which are really outside of their comfort zone, rather than just laying around at home and things like that. So this is obviously the large chunk of every population, probably in the world. Probably accounts for probably 90% of the world. And really that is like the biggest evolutionary pool of people, and we and that pool obviously is always changing over, is always evolving, and it's interesting how that, I think there may be just like little tainted problems with that pool anyway. I think maybe there is that little cultural thing of lookism and people choosing and deciding the more attractive partner over the partner with virtue. So Victorian times and Victorian eras, you would potentially more so have choices of the ones which were slightly less attractive, but would have a lot more in terms of financial viability, which will probably be the biggest bonus in the old days, and then certain characteristics of virtue as well. So I think the middle class has probably is just getting a little bit culturally battered. But I do think that there will be an overthrow of that eventually, and people will decide to lean towards virtues over instant gratification natures. So it is interesting how that middle class could evolve over time. Now, I have missed out one of the classes of people, which is a fairly interesting population of people, and I think maybe it might just be the same as the middle class, but just recreating again. And let's go to the higher echelons of the 1%, the very rich, the very powerful, all of those people. Now, they have very interesting dynamics, probably the most interesting dynamics out of everybody, because they are potentially the alphas, and maybe like the alpha women will flock to this rich and powerful nature people, and maybe we have the very intelligent people flocking to who are trying to ascend to that point. So this is like the ultimate mix, the most determined. Some people that have applied the most discipline to achieve the highest levels get to the higher echelons of human society. It's interesting, very interesting, this point, and I think there has been obviously sitting right beneath them is the middle class, and the middle class will swallow them up at a certain point. And with the middle class beneath them, they've got the welfare class, and they will swallow them up at any point as well. And it's interesting how you could think of it as like an ocean, where you have the top part of the ocean and then the bottom part of the ocean. And where an animal dies, it just gets fed upon until it falls to the bottom of the ocean, and then the crabs will start eating upon the carcass. It is very interesting, and how the highest, more disciplined pointers and the highest, most physically attractive will throw themselves to the top of the ocean, and then I think there is a certain element of a theory how they get to the top, and then they will descend back down to the bottom again. Now, let me just theorize on this point. So let's just go for the easy one here. So you have a very rich, very powerful man who is really focused on building up his business and then his business empire, and really is branching out, and he is such an industrialist, and he is really creating an immense amount of wealth and value for other people. Who is he going to find? And potentially one of the things that he may have not been taught is to really look out for the lady that makes him happy, but the one that gives him the highest amount of status. So he has chosen the alpha woman, the one who is highly attractive. So this is the jungle nature of being in the alphas. You have a child which may not necessarily be highly disciplined, or either may be highly attractive, but is in this little bit of a mixture pool of a bit of both. But as one side is an extreme to the other side, which is extreme, and is just a mixture of the two, and as they have been provided with wealth rather than worked for their own wealth, then they have slight issues. Now, obviously, where you have wealth it is a little bit easier to have a sustainable living, to invest, and I guess obviously you can make some incredibly poor decisions in your investment strategies if you have a ridiculous amounts of money to start with from the top. But really, you do have lost a lot of that hard driving, like I need to really start going here. I need to work hard. All of those things. So it is a real big battle for when I talk about the youth of the 1%. The youth of the 1% really has it tough. They and also obviously if they do have that certain level of high intelligence, but and attractiveness, but not quite to the measures of their the ones that have reached the highest points, then they're always going to be looking, and they're going to go, I can't really quite ascend or achieve to the ability of that. And where you have this hard-working middle-class person who gets up no matter how hard the day is and gets working and strives, that hard-working, determined person will pull and grab that person by the ankles and pull them down into the pools of middle-classness very quickly, whilst they ascend to the higher levels. So, evolutionary, even though you could get yourselves to a point of the alphas, unless that alpha is really selecting upon the selection of virtues. So, you get to that point of having a highly powerful businessman or entrepreneur, and then he selects a highly I could say this is a woman as well, but he selects a highly powerful and impressive business entrepreneur woman, then potentially they do have more of an opportunity to really ascend and go higher into the world of their evolutionary structure. But I don't think necessarily that happens even for this world, and I think the susceptibility of status and class really closes off the eyes of the rich 1%, and you do definitely seem to get that. So, evolutionary wise, I don't even think that the top 1% really gets this really good channeled mixture of a certain stratosphere. Now, one thing I would like to lend a little bit of a pointer to is the scientist. I'm interested in this one because I think this potentially could be one interesting perspective. Now, the scientist obviously would potentially be highly intelligent, probably would definitely have all the analytical skills plus all of the IQ skills and the pattern recognition, everything else working for him to be very masterful in the discipline of science and reasoning. So in theory, they are sort of like a little bit of a philosopher, but in a very in a good specific field. Now, I think there's possibly in certain industries, I guess you get people that will mix with other people. So if you're in the media industry, you potentially would find a lot of partners that would work in the media industry. So we may find ourselves in certain areas where people of disciplines will work with others. And it's interesting how we might have super scientists, or super engineers that potentially would work with each other, and they have a very interesting and high intelligence and work in this sphere of range. Now, it will be interesting if those people get around, but I do still think that there's still a big countermeasure. Now, say if we do have highly intelligent scientists with mating with highly intelligent scientists, then potentially they have the power to reach the top 1%, but then the top 1% will have the status, and then that will drive them down again. So we may have this feedback loop which occurs in evolutionary cycles. That might stem that theory there a bit, but I do sort of say that if there was one little area which could have that hyper-evolved person, more so than anywhere else, it would be either the super scientist or potentially the hard-working middle classer. And I think maybe out of all of the places which are going to have the better advantage in life, it's going to be the hard-working, determined person over most of those things. If you do have ultimate intelligence, but you do not have any determination, then again you're still really fighting against your own will. And I do know of a lot of people, and I'm sure probably you do as well, who are very intelligent yet have not been able to succeed in life and not been able to get any wealth from the world that we live in. So fairly interesting plays of evolution and self-evolution. Now obviously I have made some very big pointers of AI and life extension and things like that, and how that could potentially change the way in which everything evolves. But definitely this is an interesting topic of discussion of how humanity's evolution is going. Obviously, I think, again, the one thing that obviously we need to be very wary of is the welfare classes. That is a fairly sort of a danger zone, which is going to happen to society at some point, where things would have to be resolved. Now, so yeah, let's go back to just the evolution in general. I'm not quite sure as to where evolution will happen. I'm not sure exactly. So where I'm saying all these counterbalances and counterbalance measures which are occurring, which make some people ascend and then some people descend back into the pool. Again, the real reason why there's this this non-point of really ascending to a higher being, or higher, when I'm saying ascending to a higher being, ascending to a higher state of intelligence, it's all pretty much due to the fact that there is these status points, these cultural points, these attractive points, and these instant gratification points, which is pulling back humans' evolution. But I guess the only thing that really sort of is really there, and the one thing that just keeps us going and keeps us pumping, is this determined, will not give up nature of man, and this ability to adapt and survive. And it's obviously the survival instinct in man, which will, and woman obviously, and which will just keep us going and keep us driving forward and not giving up. And I guess that is really if you could make any sort of perspective of evolution, it is that driver of not giving up at any point and just fighting on, no matter what severity is thrown in their faces. That is the driver of evolution. But if we did find a way to make us get to a point of really just not being determined anymore, not really being bothered, and really just getting too relaxed in our comfortable computer chair, and not doing too much with our lives, and not really looking at and being curious about different subjects and areas of disciplines, that's where we no longer survive, and we no longer evolve as well. So I guess that's a really good point, and that you can bring back to your own self, is that really we do want to be an evolving species, a species of survival, a species of adaptability, and obviously we want to reproduce as well. We want to reproduce the effects of the ones that do have this determined, never giving up will and fight in them. Now, when I say fight, I don't mean of violence, but I mean of just determination and not quitting at the first hurdle. So bringing it back to us as people, really is interesting parts, and we really need to focus upon that. I think there has been, as we look at sort of the Huxley theories and everything else, there has been too many technologies which makes life very, very easy for us and very easy to descend into laziness and not really doing too much at all, because we can be instantly gratified in terms of our education, well, not even our in terms of our entertainment, and not really pushing ourselves forward of being disciplined in our nature. So really, I have to lend to asking questions to your conscious self rather than to your impulsive self, and say to your conscious self, and plead almost to your conscious self, please just try and look at yourself and try and think of ways that you can attain certain levels of discipline in any field. It really doesn't matter, even if it's just physically making yourself stronger and healthier. If you can go down to the gym 5 days a week, it does make an incredible amount of difference in terms of how you, once you've mastered that discipline, then how you can move on to the next discipline, and how you can reach to the higher echelons of society, but not by the culture of society, but the values of virtues itself. And once you attain that certain higher echelon of virtue, then when you have children, then, or also when you're selecting sexual partners, you should be really selecting your sexual partners based upon this lady's virtue. So if you do see this incredible philanthropist businesswoman, she's got the best eggs, and you should be running straight towards her door. Obviously, if she's kind and friendly and everything else, and she's got everything else going for her in terms of the virtue bucket, then you should be pursuing that kind of woman, because that is going to really be the evolutionary driver. And obviously, this returns back to the woman as well. That is going to be the evolutionary driver to humanity getting to the higher points of society, and it is the way that we we ourselves as a population master our own eugenics. Now, where I make these references of eugenics, obviously we all want to be guided towards this light, so that's why I appeal to you to pursue disciplines, and everybody else, because the more we try and pursue disciplines and we try and work and hard and focus upon and strive to make ourselves better, that in turn makes a better world for all of us, so that we can reap the rewards of everybody's industriousness, if that's the correct word to use. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always. Again, the common theme is evolution is really in our hands and not really in anybody else's hands. We may say that there's problems with governments and everything else, but really we are the masters of our own destiny, as I'll always keep on making a reference to. But yeah, we will. I think we're going to do it. It's just a case in time. All right. So yeah, thank you very much as always. It has been an immense pleasure. Really, when you just take if you take a step outside your house and look down the road and stuff like that, you just look at a person. A person is interesting in itself. You think of the amount of evolution which has occurred over time to actually create that human being it's amazing. Just and I always like to find people quite funny when they say, "Oh, I like people watching." It is an interesting thing that we are looking at monuments and statues of people's certain selective eugenics, which has been occurring throughout mankind for many, many thousands of years to get to that point in time. So when you do look at a person, there is an incredible amount of interest which occurs. And obviously, once you look upon a person, you can decide on whether you like somebody's attributes or you dislike somebody's attributes. And that is an incredible thing, especially when you look at how you strive and improve yourself throughout time. So, yeah, get out there, sit on a park bench and start people watching. It's a very fascinating thing. So thank you as always for your time. It's been a pleasure as always, and I will be in touch with another podcast very soon.